You are now listening to the story. He found a mute child-branded enemy of the white man, and chose to fight back. In the vast, unforgiving lands of the American West, a seemingly ordinary man did what no one else dared. He saw a child the world had cast aside, and instead of turning away, he stood up against an entire empire. This is not just a story of rescue, but a lesson in courage about seeing the human behind the prejudice. The land was quiet that morning to quiet. The kind of silence that made Silas Ward uneasy, even after a lifetime on the plains. He was riding the far edge of his property, checking for storm damage after a rough night. Broken fence posts, fallen limbs, typical aftermath. But what he found near the old cedar post wasn't a branch or a blown saddle tarp. It was something else. At first, it looked like discarded cloth, maybe a sack tangled in the wire. But as his horse drew nearer, the lump shifted. Slowly, deliberately, Silas squinted. It was a child, a boy, no older than 10, sat slumped against the fence, arms bound tight behind him with coarse rope. His skin was a deep brown, bruised and scraped, and a thick wooden sign hung from his neck like a branding yoke. On it, scrawled in jagged charcoal letters, were 5 hateful words: enemy of the white man. Silas stiffened in his saddle. His hand drifted toward the revolver on his belt. Old habits, born from older fears. He'd grown up with stories: Indian raids, settlers butchered in the dark, children stolen and never seen again. His father, God rest him, had never trusted a native man, and made sure Silas didn't either. But this scene didn't match the tales. The boy was barely conscious, his wrists bleeding from the ropes, eyes open but far away, empty in the way. Wounded animals, looked after, they'd given up fighting. Silas dismounted slowly, boots crunching the frosted grass. He approached with caution, but not because he feared an ambush. No, this was different. This child wasn't a threat. He was a message. The sign was deliberate. The ropes were tight. This wasn't a rescue from raiders or punishment from a tribal feud. This was the work of white men. The boy's lips parted, but no sound emerged. Silas crouched beside him and studied his face. The child didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't even blink. His silence ran deep, not just from exhaustion or pain, but from something broken inside. The sign around his neck was heavier than it looked, splintered and worn at the edges. As Silas gently turned it in his hands, he noticed small holes carved into the top of the wood like other messages had been hung there before. This wasn't the first label this child had carried, just the latest. Beneath his shirt, Silas spotted something even more chilling: faded scars on the boy's chest and back. Some old, some fresh. He'd been used, mistreated, passed around like an object, not a human being. And then came the sound: hoofs from the hills behind him, the low rumble of horses carried on the wind. Not a large group, maybe 3, but they weren't riding with purpose. They were riding with swagger, the kind of slow, laughing approach that comes when men think they own whatever's ahead of them. Silas looked down at the child again. He didn't say a word, but his eyes shifted toward the sound, not pleading, not hopeful, just resigned, as if he already knew what those men wanted, and didn't expect anyone to stop them. Silas stood. Every instinct inside him whispered the same thing: walk away. He could leave the boy, pretend he never saw him, let whatever was coming next happen without him. That's what most men would do. But then he looked at the boy again. No tears, no voice, just those wide, dark eyes, staring straight into Silas's soul, and something shifted. He pulled his knife. The rope snapped clean in two with a single tug. The boy's arms fell limply to his sides, wrists red and raw. He didn't even flinch. Silas knelt again, scooping the boy into his arms. He was frighteningly light, skin and bones under the tattered remains of a shirt. The sign thudded heavily against Silas's chest as he lifted the child onto his horse. Can you hold on? Silas asked, voice rough from disuse. The boy gave the smallest nod, barely perceptible. His fingers wrapped weakly around the saddle horn, Silas swung up behind him and turned the horse toward the grove near his cabin. The voices behind him grew louder, taunting, cruel, riding without a care in the world. Would check on that sign. One of them laughed. Silas pressed his heels into the horse's sides. He didn't gallop. Couldn't. The boy swayed dangerously, barely conscious. If he fell, if they caught them, God only knew what would happen. The cabin came into view, just as the sky began bleeding into twilight. It wasn't much, a one-room shelter with a fireplace, a table, and a bed that had seen better years. But it was hidden among trees, off the main trail, a place to regroup, a place to think. As Silas helped the boy down, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Through a tear in the child's shirt, on the shoulder blade, was a burn mark. Scar tissue shaped like a letter. An R, a brand, like cattle, Clayton, Reeves. The name struck Silas like a hammer. Everyone knew Reeves. Half the territory was his. Ruthless, rich, untouchable. The boy hadn't just been a message. He'd been owned. Silas stood frozen for a long moment. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was rebellion. The warmth of the cabin didn't make the silence any easier. Silas set the boy down on the old bed, his bones to light, his skin dry and sunken like a man dying of thirst. The oil lamp cast a soft glow across the room, catching every bruise, every cut, and every scar that lined the boy's small frame. He was in worse shape than Silas first thought. The boy's lips were cracked and blooded, his breathing shallow but steady. He hadn't spoken a word. Not since Silas found him. Maybe not for days. Maybe longer. Silas poured water from the jug and knelt by the bed, holding the tin cup to the boy's mouth. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, his lips parted and water spilled down his chin as he struggled to swallow. There was no gratitude in his eyes, not yet. Only exhaustion and an animal-like weariness, the kind seen in creatures that had survived cruelty too long to expect kindness. "What's your name?" Silas asked, softly. The boy opened his mouth again, but only air came out. His fingers moved to his throat, and he shook his head, mute, whether from injury or trauma. Silas couldn't tell. But it was clear this child hadn't been quiet by choice. He reached for the sign still hanging from the boy's neck, thick rope digging into his collarbone. The boy tried to help remove it, but his hands were shaking too much. Silas slid the rope over his head and set the board down carefully. And that's when he saw it. On the back of the sign, carved crudely into the wood, were more words. Hidden beneath the grime and splinters, property of Clayton Reeves. Return, if found. It confirmed what he already feared. Reeves didn't just mark land. He marked people. And this boy was one of his walking warnings, a tool to frighten others, to stake a claim, to send a message. Silas felt his stomach turn. There were rules in this world, unspoken but understood. You could be cruel, but branding a child, turning him into a traveling signpost, that was something darker, something evil. A flicker of movement outside the window caught his attention. His horse, whinny, stirred nervously. Then HOOFBEATS. Closer now. No longer distant echoes through trees. They were here. Silas snatched his rifle down from above the fireplace. Through the slit of the cabin's only window, he saw flickering torchlight and shifting shadows. 3 men, maybe 4, all mounted, all coming with purpose. He heard one of them shout, "Silas Ward. We know you're in there." So they knew his name. This wasn't random. The boy heard it too. His back stiffened. His eyes, so empty before, now sparked with raw panic, real fear, not the dull numbness from earlier. Silas placed a hand on the child's shoulder. "Get behind the bed," he whispered. The boy didn't hesitate. Another voice rang out, mocking, "You got something belongs to Clayton Reeves." They knew. They had found the cut ropes at the fence. Maybe they'd even watched him from the trees. This had been a setup. Leave the boy tied up. Wait to see who'd help hand, then come collect them both. Silas stepped quietly to the door, his rifle cradled in his arms. He didn't open it. "I don't know what you're talking about," he called out. keeping his tone even. More laughter. Don't play dumb, you touched the boy, didn't you? Thought no one would come looking. Silas glanced back at the bed. The boy was crouched low, hands gripping the floor, body tense. Not hiding dash bracing. Then came a hard knock, more like a battering ram against the door. They were done talking. Open this door, Ward, a voice growled, or we'll burn it down with you inside. Silas's eyes darted across the cabin. No back door. No way out. He was cornered. And yet, the strangest thing was, he didn't feel afraid. He felt angry, because he hadn't gone looking for a fight. But one had come to him, and now, the lines were clear. He looked down at the boy, still mute, still broken, but no longer without allies. I ain't handing him over, Silas muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Not to them. The boy rose shakily, pointing toward the back corner of the room, a crawl space behind the firewood stack. He was trying to hide, to protect Silas, even now, after everything, but Silas waved him back gently. Stay down. This ain't your fight. And then he saw it, peeking out from beneath the boy's torn sleeve, just above the elbow. A letter burned into the skin. R, not just a brand, a claim, like cattle. The rage hit him like a hammer. He stood, rifle firm in his grip, and pulled the front door open just a crack. Enough to slide something through. He threw the sign onto the porch. It hit the planks with a hollow thud. There's your sign, Silas said. Now get off my land. A moment of silence, then a different voice, young, cocky, dangerous. We ain't here for the sign, old man. A pause. We're here for the boy. The words hung in the night air, thick as smoke. We're here for the boy. Silas didn't flinch. He stepped onto the porch, rifle held at his side, barrel pointed toward the dirt. 3 men waited in his yard, their horses twitching, torches crackling. One of them, tall, lean, mean-eyed, was clearly in charge. His face wasn't covered, and his smirk wasn't subtle. I found your sign, Silas said, voice steady. Brought it home, that's all. The leader chuckled and spat. Then you won't mind if we take a look inside, just to be sure. Behind Silas, inside the cabin, he could hear the boy shifting, trying to breathe quietly, trying not to make a sound. But even the smallest scrape of wood on wood drew all 3 men's attention. There it is, said the youngest of the 3, eager. Now, he's in there. The man moved forward, but Silas stepped to block him, lifting the rifle slightly, not aimed, but ready. Don't, Silas warned. The leader didn't blink. You think you can stop us? Silas took a slow breath. I don't think anything, but I ain't letting you touch that child. The leader's eyes narrowed. That child belongs to Clayton Reeves. Silas's jaw tightened. He's not property. Sure he is, the man snapped. Reeves paid good money, used him for months. Boys got information about water routes, hunting paths, other tribes, was real useful. Until he stopped talking, Silas said nothing. The leader continued, his tone turning cruel. Had to beat the voice out of him, you know. Couldn't risk him whispering things that weren't in his interest. But he still knows things, valuable things. And Reeves don't like losing value. The pieces fell into place, the bruises, the brand, the silence. They hadn't just punished the boy. They'd broken him with purpose. Hand him over, the man said, and we forget this little misunderstanding. You get to live, that's simple. From inside the cabin, the boy shifted, again barely audible, but enough. One of the gunmen moved toward the door. Silas raised the rifle. Back up. You really want to die for a mute little savage? The man sneered. Silas didn't answer. His silence was all the answer they needed. I've been thinking about what my father taught me, Silas said finally, slow and deliberate. He taught me to fear people who look different. Taught me stories of bloodshed and savagery. But he never taught me how to sleep at night after walking away from a child in need. The gunmen stared, and I've decided, Silas added, lifting the rifle to his shoulder. Some things are worth dying for. The leader's smirk faltered. then -HOOFBEATS. From the trees behind the gunmen, more horses, not theirs. They turned just in time to see shapes emerge from the shadows. 6. No 7 riders. Silent and steady. Faces painted in war colors. Long spears, feathered braids. Proud posture. Native warriors. The leader of the group was older than the rest, scarred and stoic. His gaze was sharp as flint. He spoke not in English, but in a commanding voice that carried across the clearing. Silas didn't know the language, but he understood the intent. The boy inside the cabin responded, his voice broken but real. It was the first sound he'd made since Silas found him, half sob, half gasp. Entirely human. Recognition. The older warrior's eyes flickered with emotion, then darkened. What is this? One of the gunmen snapped, reaching for his weapon. The older warrior's voice cut through the tension. You stole my blood. The tall gunman tried to bluff. He belongs to Clayton Reeves. Got the paperwork. Show me. The warrior said. The man hesitated. Ugh, not on me right now. Then you have nothing. The warrior dismounted and walked past Silas, straight to the cabin door. He paused, looked at Silas, and asked calmly, May I? Silas nodded. Inside. The reunion was wordless. The warrior dropped his knees beside the boy, lifting his face gently in his hands. The boy leaned into him, trembling. Outside, the 3 gunmen began backing toward their horses. Silas noticed it. And so did the warrior. They're not planning to face justice. Silas muttered. They are planning to run. The old warrior replied, to warn Reeves. And then his voice changed low. Guttural, lethal. He stepped forward and addressed the men. You will return to your master, he said, and tell him his property has been reclaimed. Tell him this land remembers its children, and those who take them will not sleep well again. The leader of the gunmen swallowed hard. And if we refuse, the warrior smiled, and it was a terrible, quiet thing, then you won't be returning at all. The men didn't argue. They mounted up in silence and vanished into the night. Silas stood still, rifle in hand, heart still pounding. He looked at the warrior. They'll come back. With more, I know. The man said, You think we should run? You could, the warrior said, placing a hand on his grandson's head. Take what you can and vanish into the hills. He looked Silas in the eyes. But you didn't run before. Silas looked at the boy. He was standing now, weak but upright. For the first time, his eyes held something that hadn't been there before. Hope. Double quotes. No, Silas said. I reckon I'm done running from what's right. The warrior nodded. Then you're one of us now. The fire burned low in the hearth, casting long shadows across the cabin's rough wooden walls. The air inside was still, thick with the weight of what had just happened. Outside, the night was quiet again. Quiet. The boy sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a wool blanket, his bare feet touching the cold floor. His grandfather stood behind him, one hand resting protectively on his shoulder. Silas, still holding his rifle, leaned against the wall near the window, watching. For a long time, no one spoke. Then the warrior turned to Silas. He says you cut the ropes. I did. He says his children will know your name. And their children after them. Silas shifted uncomfortably. I didn't do it for a name. I just couldn't walk away. The old man nodded solemnly. Most would have. He reached into a pouch at his belt and handed the boy a small cloth bundle. The child unwrapped it slowly, revealing a piece of carved bone on a leather cord. A pendant, no bigger than a coin, etched with symbols too old for Silas to understand. He kept this hidden, the grandfather said. Even when they stripped him, beat him, tried to erase him. He paused, this was made by his father before he died. The boy stood, trembling slightly, and stepped toward Silas. He looked up at the man who had saved him, not with fear or obligation, but with something deeper. Trust. He held out the pendant with both hands, bowing his head. Silas stared at it, frozen. The warrior translated. He says he wants you to have it, for protection, for honor. Silas took it carefully, holding the carved bone as if it were made of glass. He began, then stopped, unsure of what to say. He finally managed, "Tell him I'm honored." The boy smiled. It was small, hesitant, but real. The first smile Silas had seen from him. And in that moment, something cracked open inside Silas's chest. Something he hadn't felt in years. Not guilt, not duty. Hope. The next morning came with a warning. Before dawn, the warrior returned from scouting the trail. His face was grim. "They're coming," he said simply. Silas didn't ask how many. He didn't need to. "Reeves?" he asked. "Yes," the warrior replied, "and not just his hired guns. He's bringing men, horses, enough fire to level a small town." Silas nodded, then looked at the boy. The child was standing now, by the fireplace, rubbing the carved bone between his fingers, like a talisman. "I won't hand him over," Silas said. "I know. You'll help." The old man smiled, but not with joy. "The land will help, the trees, the silence. We have ways of disappearing." Silas raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like running." "No," the warrior said. "That sounds like surviving." He glanced toward the cabin door. "But if you stay, you will need to vanish too." Silas hesitated, then looked around his cabin, his life. A place built with callous hands and lonely years. The home of a man who had chosen quiet over connection. "Until now, I've already vanished once," Silas said. "I lived in silence long enough." He looked again at the boy. "I'd rather go down fighting than live knowing I let him be taken." The warrior placed a hand on Silas's shoulder. "Then we go together." By nightfall, the plan was set. They would disappear not in fear, but in defiance. While Reeves and his men were on their way, Silas, the boy, and the warriors slipped through the trees, leaving no trail behind. The boy's grandfather had mapped the land since before the railroads came. He knew every ravine, every hidden spring, every hollow big enough to hide a heartbeat. And as they vanished into the hills, Silas left one thing behind, a sign, nailed to the front door of his cabin, burned with a brand of his own making. It read, "Some things are not for sale." Reeves arrived with 15 men and a fury carved in money. They found an empty cabin and a name that meant nothing to them, Silas Ward. But the land swallowed them. Every trail led nowhere. Every clue ran cold. And at night, his men whispered of being watched. By eyes that never blinked. By spirits that didn't forgive. Eventually, they gave up. Reeves moved onto other territory, other lands to claim. But something in him had shifted. He had lost, not just a child, but the certainty that he could own everything. Back in the hills, life began again. The boy started to speak slowly at first. Broken words, shy sentences, but each one stitched a wound. Each one reclaimed what had been taken. He spoke of his father, of his mother, of the songs they used to sing. He even began to laugh again, quiet, unsure, but unmistakable. Silas didn't ask much. He just listened. Sometimes, that was enough. Years passed. The story of the boy with the sign became a quiet legend, carried on wines and whispered between campfires. Few outside the hills knew exactly what happened, but those who lived through it remembered. They remembered a man named Silas Ward, an old rancher who defied a land baron, who saw a child instead of a threat, and who chose to risk everything for someone the world had labeled enemy. The boy grew. He learned to run again, to speak, to live. His grandfather taught him the old ways, how to track by starlight, how to walk without leaving footprints, how to speak with both words and silence. But it was Silas who taught him how to stand tall. Even when the world tried to break you, they called him Tahoma, thunder without sound. It was a name given not for what he said, but for what he had endured. Each year, around the time of his rescue, Tahoma returned to that place in the hills where a cabin once stood. There was nothing left now but scorched wood and grass grown over. Reef's men had eventually returned, and when they did, they brought fire. But Silas had already gone. When they reached his land, they found only that weathered sign, still nailed to the doorframe. that no longer stood. Some things are not for sale. They hunted for weeks, but the boy and the Indian sympathizer had vanished like ghosts. Every lead went cold. Every trail looped into nothing. Even Reeves, for all his power, could not control the land or the legend that had begun to rise from it. Tahoma had children of his own, and when they were old enough to understand, he told them everything. He told them about the men who called themselves owners. He told them about the pain, the silence, the fear. And then he told them about the man who stopped, the man who didn't walk away. He would sit them around a fire and begin, always, with the same words. There was a man named Silas Ward, and he saw me not as an enemy, but as a child. The carved bone pendant, the one Tahoma had given Silas, was passed down through generations. It hung in homes, in tents, in lodges. Wherever his family went, the symbol of courage went with them. It became more than a charm. It became proof that in the worst of times, good men still existed, even when no one asked them to be. Epilogue. The echo years later, long after Reeves had died and his name had faded into the background noise of history, a young girl, Tahoma's great-granddaughter, asked about the man in the story. Was he scared? She asked the rancher. Tahoma, old now, his hair silver but his voice firm, smiled. Yes, he said, but he did it anyway. Why? He looked into the fire, eyes glinting with memory, because the world doesn't need perfect men. It needs men who choose right when it's hard. She reached for the carved pendant hanging around her neck and held it tightly. That's what I want to be, she whispered. And just like that, the story lived on, not just in words, but in the fire it lit inside someone new. Final message. This story isn't just about a boy or a rancher. It's about the moment someone breaks the chain. The moment one person says, not this time, not this child, ugh, not on my land. And it reminds us that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is see the humanity in someone the world has taught us to hate. Silas Ward made that choice, and because he did, a legacy was born.